Hey there, everybody. Thanks again for joining me for another live with Luke. Today, we're going to be talking about a couple things I've been messing around with this week, and that is going to be some parameters. We're going to be talking about multi-body parts. You know, I love me some multi-body parts. I think it's a super fast and easy way to build things. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about materials. I ran into situation where I wanted to change the orientation of materials on a surface, and just thought I'd share it. I'm not sure if anybody knew how to do that, so I'm going to jump right into it. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was parameters. So I'm going to share my desktop, and I'll do a little picture in picture, and we will put my webcam back on so you can see if you want to look at me. If you don't want to look at me, that's fine. So I want to talk about parameters a little bit and ways to leverage parameters to your benefit for creating geometry really fast. So a couple ways you can do this. The first thing you want to do when you're doing parameters, everybody thinks you have to do parameters ahead of time, where I have to go in and create a parameter called length, another one called distance, another one, called height. And you could do that. Like if you wanted to, you could come in here, you could go to the Manage tab, you could go to Parameters, and you could actually start to add and define all the parameters that you want to define as you're going. That's totally fine, and that's definitely the way I would work if it was a consistent parameter that I'm using all the time when I'm creating geometry. But another way to do this is you can just do this kind of as you go and as you're building your geometry. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to do my 2-point rectangle, and I'm just going to say that this is going to be 6 inches by 2 inches. And we can start to use parameters right away inside of Inventor. So if I know that this 2 inches is always 1/3 of the overall length, what I can do is, rather than typing in 2 inches, I can actually highlight that parameter, and you're going to see it says D0. If you didn't know, when Inventor is creating sketches and extrusions and all the different things that it creates, what it does is it starts at D0 and it just keeps on adding D1, D2, D3, D7000. So every single dimension or extrusion or feature you create, you're actually creating these D values. And as long as you remember that D value and what it's used for, you can reuse it over and over and over again. So I'm going to say D0 divided by 3. And you can see it was red before. Whenever that parameter is red, that means it's an equation that can't be solved. As soon as you put in a real equation that can actually be solved mathematically, it turns black. I'm going to hit enter, and you can see it says fx equals 2. So this is an indication visually that you are using parameters. And I should shut my speakers off. James is going to yell at me for having those on, because he always yells at me for having my speakers on. So that's a visual indication that the dimension here is driven by a parameter. So I can continue to use these parameters as much as I like. So when I go to extrude this now, I could type in a value. So I could come in here and I hit R instead of E. So I'm going to extrude this. I could come in here and type a value. I could pick a value on the screen, or if you hit this arrow here, it's going to list all the dimension. It's going to let you pick that dimension. So if I go here and I do show dimension, it's going to show the dimensions you have access to. I can pick previous dimensions. I can just highlight that area and I can say this is going to be 6 inches. And in this case, you see it says D0 again. I'm going to divide that by 6. So now what I have is this pretty intelligent component, right? So if I come in here and I make my sketch visible, and I just change that one parameter, let me change my materials. I'll use this later in my example. So let's change these materials to let's go to the Autodesk Appearance Library. When you choose the Autodesk Appearance Library, you get a much bigger list to choose from. So it just gives you way more materials and things to work with. So I'm going to go with a wood, and I'm going to go pine, no gloss. And you're going to see that this is, a pine-looking material. And we'll talk about materials in a second. But if I change this one dimension, this is the original D0. You can see it right there. So now whenever I change this D0 to, let's say this is now going to be a 48-inch piece of wood. I'm going to update. I can see my local update is necessary. So all of my other dimensions automatically updated because I use parameters. So this went to 16. My extrusion itself, if I edit the feature, went to that D0 divided by 6. So a really easy way to make really intelligent components using parameters, and you don't have to go in and create those parameters ahead of time, and I can continue to do that. So if I want to add a fillet or a chamfer to this, I can go to my 3D model, I can add my fillet, and I'm going to put a fillet on all 4 of these sides. Let me bring my fillet dialog box in the window. And again, rather than typing in a specific value, I can actually pick that value. So I could highlight this and say, I want this to be some percentage of this number or this one. You can build these. So that's D1, and it's going to be D1 divided by 4. So it's going to be, if I do it correctly, so it's going to be D1 divided by 4. So it's going to be 1/4 of that overall length. So a really easy way to, again, start to build these really intelligent models. So make sure you use these parameters. And then the neat thing that happens here is when you go and look at your parameters, so when I go to manage and I go to parameters, you're going to see D0 through D4. Those are the only D values that we created. You can see where it gets used. So if you haven't been in parameters recently, and I haven't done a lot in parameters recently, but this consumed by is great. It shows you that D0 is used by D2, it's used by D1, it's used in Sketch 1. So it's a really easy way to know how it affects those different features that you're creating or any additional sketches that you're creating. So these are the model parameters. You could go in and create your own, but again, for doing quick and easy modeling, this is a really great way to leverage parameters. You can see all your mathematical equations that you're creating. You can do multiplication, division, sine, cosine, all kinds of stuff. As long as it's a mathematical operation, it can be solved. It's a great way to speed up and automate to some degree your design and engineering process. So let's shut the visibility of that sketch off. And the next thing I wanted to talk about, and this is going to be a short live with Luke, is materials. So let's say this was a piece of wood, and I'm going to edit my feature, and I only want this to be an inch tall, and I don't want my fillets, and I want this sketch here to be 1/4 of that, so by 4. So let's say this is a strip of wood, and when I'm looking at this, because of the way I built my model, the material isn't going the way that I want it to. And there's a couple ways to change this. So a really neat way to do this is if you want to change individual faces. So if you change the selection to face and edge, so I'll change my selection to face and edge. And what I can do is I can pick that specific face, right there, and I want to orient that grain so it's basically going 90 degrees to where it is right now. I'll pick that face. I will go to my adjust option, and inside the adjust option, you grab this lower grip here, and you're going to rotate that 90 degrees, and now you have to hit the checkbox. Now I can see that I rotated that, and now my grain is traveling the direction that I want it to travel. You can see this grain is incorrect. Now, you could do more than one at a time, so I can grab that face. I can hold down my control and grab that face, so I have the top face highlighted and the bottom face. I will go to my adjust, and now whenever I do this, it's a little bit slower when you have multiple faces selected, but now I actually adjusted the front and the back at the same time. I can now grab the edges, so I'll grab this edge, and I'll go to my adjust, and I will rotate these 90 degrees as well. And it locks into place whenever you get to the 90 degrees, and now I have a properly oriented grain. And this always throws people off when you're doing materials with textures and patterns in them, because it just kind of, depending on the orientation you made the model, it really just kind of throws that material on there in a generic way. The other thing you could do, I'm just going to back off of this a little bit. So I'll go back to my default, and I'll change this to a body. I can pick the body, and I can do adjust, and I can actually adjust all of these at the same time. That might not give you the end result that you want. In this case, it actually does, because I wanted the top, the sides, and all the way around. But that might not be the end grain that you want to see on that end. So this is when you might switch from a body, which does everything, to an individual, an individual face or edge. So now I could grab that, and I could adjust this to be more of an end grain kind of orientation. And I didn't hit the checkbox. You have to hit the checkbox. So I can go to like an end grain right there. Make sure you hit the checkbox. So a couple ways to change your materials, and this is really important when you start to do different materials when you're doing multi-body parts. So I'm a big fan of multi-body parts. So let's say I'm going to make another piece of wood here. So I'm going to do a frame, let's say, for a picture. I'm going to do a new sketch right here. I'm going to add in my rectangle. I'm going to let that project what I need. I'll show dimensions for that because I want to choose. Let's try that differently. Let's do this, and let's do show dimensions for the extrusion. I want this to be 1 inch, that D2. So I'm tying all of these together. I'm going to extrude this as a new body, and my dimension is going to be, I'm going to hit show dimension again. I'm going to pick that one right there. And you may or may not get the orientation of that body, but because that body is a separate body now, whenever you do your body selection, you could actually come in here. So if I wanted this orientation to go opposite, I could pick that, go to my material adjust. I could have this one rotate to be 90 degrees. And now within one part, I have very easily adjusted the material orientation of different bodies. If this was one solid body, I would have to go through and do individual face selection of components. So just to finish this up, let's mirror this. I'm going to mirror the bodies. I want to create a new one so these all stay individual. I will mirror about that plane, and I will do, you can see that the orientation needs to change. So I could, because it's a brand new body, I could pick this, go to here, go to my orient, make sure you hit the checkbox, and I'll do one final mirror of this. I'll mirror the body, make it a whole separate solid. Ooh, I don't have a plane. Let's try this. Let's do a plane between here and there. So it was parallel and through that point. So now I have a midplane, and I can do mirror, new solid. And basically I am wrapped up. I'll go to my body selection. I will do my adjust, get that to be 90 degrees so it matches the other one. So a super easy way to come in here and mess with your materials and do some multi-body parts. So let me shut the visibility of that off. And I always like to wrap things up with a nice little render. So let's go to view, let's go to realistic, and let's go to our shadows are on, and let's go to photo booth, and let's do a quick ray trace, and we will set that to draft. And just a nice little image for wrapping up this Live with Luke session. So I hope you got something out of this. Again, we talked about referencing parameters, and you don't necessarily have to define them ahead of time. Make sure you use multi-body parts. You know what? I'm going to go one more minute. Let me disable this, or a couple more minutes. I've had a few folks ask. They say, oh, using multi-body parts is a bad idea. You know, it doesn't show up in the bill of material. You know, you technically have 4 different pieces there. How do you work with this? If you haven't done it before, one thing that you can do is you can actually take a multi-body part. And I don't think I've shown this before. You can take this single multi-body part. So I have 4 bodies in here: the bottom, the right side, the left side, and the top. But let's say I want to do a bill of material of this. What you can do is you can hit make components. So basically what this does is this creates components from, oh, I hit the wrong one. You can make parts. I have to hit save. Helps if I practice this ahead of time. So let's make this 22. There we go. Let's try that again. So make components. So what we're going to do is take all of these individual bodies, and it's going to take those 4 solids. It's going to make an assembly. It's going to, you know, put that in whatever folder structure you want. If you want to use a specific template, you can use a specific template. And it's going to create brand new parts for you. So you can see what it did here. By default, it names them the same name as the body. So it would help if you changed or named your bodies ahead of time if you wanted to. It tells you where they're going to go. It's just going to go in the default location. It's a standard part file. There's no scale factor. I hit apply. It's going to save all 4 of those parts as individual components. You're going to see now what I have is I have a 22 assembly file, and inside of this 22 assembly file, I now have individual components. So those of you that like doing multi-body parts like I do it all the time. It's really a great way to, again, very quickly create components that are going to stay associative. So here's another cool piece of this. If I go all the way back to my original sketch, and let's say I make this 66 inches. I finish my sketch. All those parts update. My assembly also updates. And my individual parts, if I measure this now, update, helps if I pick the right edge. The individual parts update. So creating those multi-body parts, you can break them out into individual parts. You can make an assembly. They stay associative. So keep that in mind as you're making stuff. So hopefully today was beneficial. I'm going to try to do these live with Luke's at least once, if not twice a week. So stay tuned. They're probably going to be sporadic, and it'll just be topics that I happen to be working with. So have a great day. See you folks later.